Hello and welcome back to the Menagerie previews and my first impressions of same. If you don't know what the deal with this is, I'd recommend go checking out the day one preview video where I get into that a little bit. Today, day two, we have a theme of horses. So horses are a non-supply pile that have 30 copies of the horse action. The horse is a 3-cost action plus 2 cards plus 1 action. Return this to its pile. This is not in the supply. Obviously very reminiscent of Experiments. Enough so, in fact, that I'm a little disappointed, I have to admit, that they are so similar. I don't know. I was hoping for something that would explore a somewhat different design space when I read Save a Draw for Later. Something maybe more like Villagers. I don't know. But, I mean, it's fine. I probably won't remember to care about this, in a couple weeks' time. So it probably doesn't matter. Anyway, so then the cards that we have to look at today are cards that gain horses under various conditions. So we'll start with Supplies. Supplies is a 2-cost treasure that produces 1 coin, and when you play this, gain a horse onto your deck. So my initial reaction to this is that it doesn't look like something that you want early, but it looks like it could be pretty nice as the game progresses. Obviously, it's very cheap, so it would be easy enough to get it early if you want it. But my thought here is, okay, copper is a bad card. And if you offset a copper, adding a copper to your deck by adding a horse to your deck, and we can generalize and just say that you have like a permanent horse because it's something close enough to that, makes no difference. Then your net draw is neutral. Your net ability to draw your deck is neutral. In some cases, that's fine because you're not trying to draw your deck, for example. But in the majority of cases, I would say that you really haven't made forward progress by doing that, by investing in supplies. What you have done, because of the top decking, is increased the quality of your next turn and increased your reliability. And it's the latter that I'm really thinking of as the best use case, where you are able to draw your deck, but you're not necessarily going to reliably kick off a turn because you just need to line the right components up. And one of the ways to help solve that problem is to front load your draw. And so if you increase your deck size by 2, and then also have something that draws 2 cards, like I said, you've maintained your net draw. It's the same as it was before, but you've put that draw up front, right? Of course, you might end up with the supplies being the 7th card in your deck or whatever, but you definitely will have the horse as the 1st card in your deck. And so in that scenario, I think you can increase your reliability, not probably in a deck that cares about doing it. You're probably not going to get to the point where it means that you're definitely drawing your deck, because again, you still have to draw through the supplies. But it will, make it easier to line up the things that you need to kick off your turn. And I think that's probably the best use case for it, or at least the best common use case for it. There are certainly other use cases for it in combination with specific cards. I'm thinking of Storyteller and Villa in particular, where you can mid-turn gain the horse. That's going to be really good. But obviously those are pretty niche circumstances. And in general, like I said, I don't really see this being something that you want to get early, unless maybe if you're playing a money focused deck, you might actually do that. If you have 2 anyway, you don't necessarily mind having some copper in your deck, and a copper that is less bad for your deck, and allows you to have, good turns or better turns than you might otherwise have if you have no, general source of non-terminal draw. Like maybe that's a thing. Um, but yeah, in general, I don't like see myself opening this. Um, I think I don't know. I mean, maybe on a 5-2, if you figure like you're gonna want one eventually anyway, and it isn't like really hurting you either too much, maybe you do pick one up. But I don't really, like I said, see it being very strong early game. Like the lab effect at in the early game isn't always even that strong anyway, because you just don't have that much exciting stuff to draw into. Um, and so if you open 5-2, you open supplies and some like great 5 cost. Yeah, you can maybe get lucky and play like the supplies turn 3 and then play the horse turn 4 and draw your 5 or something like that. But I mean, you would have been more likely to just draw your 5 if you hadn't gotten the supplies in the first place. So yeah. Anyway, overall, I think it's a pretty niche card. Copper is just not very good. And I don't see like now, I didn't mention one other synergy is with counterfeit. I think counterfeit could be really good with this. Because then you get 2 horses and you don't have the supplies anymore. But yeah, in general, I think it's on the weaker side. All right, so the next card is Scrap. A 3-cost action. Trash a card from your hand. Choose a different thing per 1 it costs. +1 card, +1 action, +1 buy, +1 coin. Gain a silver, gain a horse. So when I first read this card, I was like, holy crap, this card is bonkers. Not necessarily in power level, but just in options. Like, you can do so many different things with this card. It's going to be a crazy high skill test card. And then I reread it and noticed choose a different thing. Now, I don't think that means that my initial reaction was completely wrong, but it was at least partially wrong, because you can't do things like, okay, right, this time I'm going to trash an estate and just draw 2 cards and, trigger a shuffle. This time I'm going to, trash a silver and do, turn it into a village with +2 actions, +1 card, or, like you can't do anything like that. You have to choose a uniquely different thing a la pawn for each choice. And not only does that limit the card's options quite a bit, it also means that it gets no benefit beyond a 6-cost card. So there's no benefit to trashing a 7 or an 8 in terms of gaining more out of it. Which is particularly unfortunate because we just looked at Animal Affair yesterday, which is in general a great trash for benefit card. And the other problem is that like this is not optional. So if you don't want a silver, for example, that's pretty much the only time I think it would come up. Actually, I mean you're never gonna. Well, +1 card could be. No, never mind. Excuse me, sorry. I was going to say +1 card could be undesirable, but as long as you're pairing it with +1 action, it's never really going to be an issue. So yeah, I mean, in theory, you could be trashing a 6 and not wanting to gain a silver. I don't think you're ever going to not want to gain a horse. Horse is just going to be good. But yeah, it's still got a lot of flexibility when you're trashing cheap cards, but as the cards get more expensive, you get less and less flexibility, and it becomes like closer and closer to being like a supermarket sort of thing. I wasn't when I said that, I meant like super space market, not like supermarket, but I guess that works too. Anyway, so yeah, I think the best comparisons for this as in like an early game trasher are to some of the more tempo-y trashers like Junk Dealer, Priest, Salvager. Those are generally all going to be better early game trashers than Scrap. Although they're all more expensive for what it's worth, so I mean, I guess they ought to be. But this card, the point is that this card does some of what they do, depending on what you want. So for example, if you're trashing estates, you can take one of the 2 coins that you would get off of Salvager or Priest. You can also take the buy that you would get off of Salvager. You can take the card action that you would gain off of Junk Dealer, but just not the coin. So you can have sort of a poor man's version of some of those cards with this when you're trashing estates. Of course, unfortunately, if you're trashing copper, you just get nothing. And that's a pretty big downside to this card, because early game you want to be trashing copper, and this is maybe actually the worst copper trasher in the game. I mean, you get absolutely nothing for it. Even Trade Route gives you a buy. I'm trying to think if there's anything that's like equivalently sad. There probably is. I'm probably forgetting about something, but yeah, I mean, this is a really bad copper trasher. So it's definitely, I mean, that and that's not uncommon for trash for benefit cards. That's not to say that you won't get this card to trash coppers with, because unlike say Trade Route, the fact that you can gain value out of trashing estates or trashing more expensive cards means that it's worth picking up for that purpose. And then sometimes you're going to trash copper, and that's going to be okay, because trashing copper is a good effect. So yeah, I mean, I think as an early game card, it's going to be on the weak side relative to those other early trashers, but I think it's still going to be worth getting in a lot of cases, just because early trashing is good. And stuff like trash non-terminally trash an estate, so take +1 action and then gain a horse, like that's really good. I mean, that might in a lot of cases be better than what you get out of a card like Salvager, depending on what you're trying to do with your money that turn. So I mean, one of the things we're gonna have to see with this card is how good are horses actually. How valuable is it to gain horses? And of course, that's going to depend a lot on the board. But I mean, it seems like a pretty good effect. I could definitely see that being one of the more popular options early on with this card. Although gain a silver is also interesting, because it's sort of, it's a way to turn this card into something more akin to like remake or develop or what's the card? Dismantle. I mean, it's obviously not the same as any of those things, but something where rather than thinning your deck, you're turning a bad card into a better card. So if you want to kind of, if you want to avoid having to gain or having to buy rather economy early in the game, you want to just like grab a bunch of cheap actions or something, you could use Scrap, trash your estates into silver, essentially. And I mean, I could see that being a thing. Kind of like, I guess that's also similar to like Transmogrify, Upgrade. I mean, it's not the same as any of those things, but there's some parallels in terms of what you can do with it. I guess the strongest part about this card by far is the fact that it can fit into so many of those slots. So you can use it as something kind of like an upgrade on, or transmogrify, or whatever, develop on your estates. You can use it as something like kind of like Junk Dealer, where it's continuing to move through your deck. It's not acting as a stop card. You can use it as something kind of like Priest or Salvager, where it's giving you a little bit of money back, or you can gain a horse. And this isn't really going into what it can do when you're trashing more expensive cards, and it's acting as something, as I said, like a supermarket. I could imagine, for example, that if you have a board with rats, you play, you get some rats, and then you start scrapping the rats, and you can just play that as like a extra draw extra draw market, where you take card action, buy coin, and then you draw 2 cards because you're trashing your rats. Or you play it, you don't take the card and you gain a horse, or you can do some pretty fun things if you've got other cards like that in your deck that like want to be trashed. Scrap Fortress, that seems pretty good. So there are definitely some synergies there. Okay, overall, this card has a lot going on. It's really hard to evaluate in a vacuum, but I think it's a good card. I think it's like I said, it's going to be on the weaker side as like an early thinner. I think its best use case is definitely on the trash for benefit side, but I think it still does enough that you're going to want to get it as an early thinner if there aren't stronger options available. Next up, we've got Livery, which is a 5-cost action, plus 3 coins. This turn, when you gain a card costing 4 coins or more, gain a horse. So, one other thing before I get into that, that Livery reminded me of, Scrap really does not like cost reduction, so keep that in mind if you're playing with Scrap. I mean, even more so than a card like Salvager, which certainly doesn't like cost reduction, but like in this case of Salvager, all you're ever sacrificing is coins, right? But in the case of Scrap, if you have cost reduction, you're sacrificing options, which is probably more painful on the whole, especially because in the case of Salvager, like if you have cost reduction, to some extent, that depending on what the cost reduction is on and what you're trying to buy, that can offset the reduced coins from Salvager. But in this case of Scrap, that really only comes up if you were going to take the coin, and it only comes up once, and everything else is like, oh no, now I don't get my plus card or whatever. So watch out for that. All right, so back to Livery. So this card, it reminds me of Kiln insofar as it's another card that really wants to be played like in a strong engine deck in the middle of the turn, non-terminally. Well, I mean, it's always terminal, but not with your last action, right? Like while you still have the ability to play more actions, you can play like Livery, and then you can play a gainer and like gain a bunch of horses. I mean, granted, Livery, unlike Kiln, like the gain and play is maybe not as important. Like you probably more often are happy to just shove a bunch of horses into your deck to help you with your next turn, as opposed to wanting to get them this turn in particular. But I mean, if you do have gainers in your deck, you're going to want to play Livery before the gainers, and that could be challenging. Anyway, right, and then this is another card that really does not like cost reduction, because obviously if you're gaining cards, that would cost 4, but they actually cost 3, now you're not gaining the horses, and that's sad. It does... I'm sure that this $4 price point was chosen so that gaining horses doesn't cause you to gain more horses. I don't think there's any way to increase the cost of a supply pile, so you don't have to worry, or that particular synergy is not going to exist. Anyway, yeah, so obviously, definitely a payload card. The +3 coins almost seems like it's the intended to be there in part as like the consolation prize in case you can't manage to gain many horses. I mean, in general, if you play this and you do nothing but buy something, you're going to get at least one horse because it's not going to be hard to hit 4 when you're playing this for +3 coins. So in that respect, you can see the card's floor as +3 coins gain a horse, which is a lot more appealing than just terminal +3 coins for sure. It might even be good enough that it's worth getting if that's all you're really expecting it to do. I'm not really sure. I don't have a good sense of how good gaining horses is going to be. Maybe that's not good enough because the horses are one shots. And in general, 5 costs that provide like terminal +3 coins are not the strongest cards. And my reaction to this card is that it has the potential to be like a win more card, more so than just like an independently strong card. So like if you're already drawing your deck and you're already gaining a bunch of things and you have like a strong thing going on, you play this and then you gain a bunch of horses and now you've really increased the number of gains and your reliability, and that's all great. But is this card gonna like help you get to that point? Maybe, but I kind of doubt it. It comes back to the thing with supplies where if you put this card in your deck to gain 1 horse per turn and you're not primarily playing this card for the money, then you're just primarily playing it for the horse. Then if you're only gaining 1 horse per turn, you're just offsetting the stop card that you have in livery. So while I think that this card could be worth getting for just gaining 1 horse per play, I think that's only going to be true for like decks that aren't doing a lot, I guess, and essentially are just happy to play like a more money focused strategy, single buy type deal. I could see the horse being like a nice bonus there, where it's like, okay, I didn't hit 6, I can't buy a gold. I'll get a livery for 5, and then I get a couple of those, and then I'll get some horses as I go through, and then that's fine. Not exciting, but it's fine. But in general, I think if you're only gaining 1 horse, it's probably just not good enough. And so you probably need to be setting it up. I mean, to be fair, the setup isn't going to be as hard probably in general as Kiln, because you really just need some plus buy. But it does mean you're going to probably, most plus buy is terminal, you're probably going to need, terminal space. You're going to need draw to line up the livery with your plus buy. So, of course, the horses to some extent are providing that draw. If you can collide a couple times or even just once, and get several horses the first time, then you can, make it easier to continue to collide. One thing I would say is don't get into the trap of oh, I have a livery down and I have buys, but I don't have any money, so let me just buy some coppers to get some horses. Don't do that. I mean, unless you're getting goons points, or there's some other, you have a watchtower to trash the coppers, there's some other consideration that makes it that lowers the cost of doing that. But I mean, again, for the obvious reasons, it's not worth gaining a horse, or gaining a copper to gain a horse. That being said, if you had not 2, maybe 3 but like a whole bunch of liveries in play, then I could see that being worthwhile. The only thing is, again, you have to keep in mind that like every time you do that, you're just replacing the horses that you had before, presumably, but you're gaining more cards in your deck and making it harder and harder for that number of horses to like draw through the stuff that you've been adding. So that's something to keep in mind. Like the delivery won't like it will, over time it will just maintain draw. It won't increase draw because the horses will go away when you play them. So you should not expect to be able to like sustain adding lots and lots of stop cards to your deck by virtue of the horse gains off of livery. All right, so overall, yeah, I think I like I said, I think the card is a win more card more so than it's a card that's gonna help you win in the first place. So I guess I think it's on the weaker side. I mean, I think it has the potential to be really, really nice in a deck that's already doing good stuff. I just, like I said, don't think it's going to be a card that helps you do good stuff in the first place very much. Yeah, so, one other thing I wanted to mention just about horses is I find it a little odd that they cost 3. Obviously, you can't buy them, so it pretty much only matters for stuff that's like looking at costs. Primarily, that's Trash for Benefit or Chariot Race or other things like that. Knights, Seer, but just in terms of sort of internal consistency, it's odd to me that horses would cost 3 because if you the most immediately comparable cards are probably Experiment, obviously, and then Encampment. And both of those cards are like, if horses were a purchasable action, then both Encampment and Experiment would be like basically strictly better than them. Certainly in terms of their like on play of either on play or on gain effect. Like Experiment's better because you get 2 of them. Encampment's better because you get an additional action and you have the possibility of hanging on to it. So I would think horses would be like a 2 or even a 1 cost. So I'm not really sure why they cost 3. I'm sure there's some reason that I'm unaware of, but it's just like a little bit of an odd thing that I noticed. Anyway, that will do it for day 2 of the previews. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow for day 3.